I've been a fire lookout for 12 seasons. I know the difference between normal forest sounds and everything else. What I heard that summer in the Cascade Range wasn't normal. My name is Ray Kellner. I'm 42, divorced, and I keep coming back to towers because the routine makes sense to me. Whitman Ridge is a 47-foot tower with a small glass cab and a steel hatch set back from the service road in dense timber. It isn't romantic up close. It's plywood, metal fasteners, a catwalk that hums when the wind hits it right, and a place to sit where you can see past the tree line when the weather cooperates. I checked in with base on arrival, read the handoff notes, and went through the equipment like always. Radios were clean. The supply drop had landed the week before. There was a note about blowdown near the north approach and a reminder to log every visibility change, even if it only lasts a minute. Morning weather was at 8, afternoon at 2, with a final check at 6. The job is mostly repetition done the same way, every day, so your head doesn't invent anything. A weather observation isn't just looks cloudy. Read the sling psychrometer, calculate relative humidity off the chart, note wind speed off the anemometer. Only after that do you sweep for smoke. The Osborne sits on its pedestal like a little ship's wheel. If you haven't used one, it's a brass ring with sights and azimuths that turns 360 degrees. You line the sights on a target, read the bearing, and note the landmark so if you ever do see smoke, you aren't guessing which ridge it's on. I took one full sweep every morning after weather, slow enough that the ring didn't carry itself past where I wanted it. I checked ladder bolts and wiped down the radio cabinet vents. Small stuff prevents bigger problems at 3 in the morning when there's no one to call but yourself. My first days ran by the book. I logged cloud types and wind speed and called in my observations. The radio kept me connected to the other towers in the region. Sarah worked Pine Ridge, 15 miles to the east. Tom had Bear Mountain, 12 miles north. You don't see each other from the cabs, but you hear enough voices on the radio that you don't forget there are other people out there doing the same job. I kept an evening routine so the days didn't smear into each other. Coffee, wipe down the bench, make a note to myself. Try a call to Helena if the phone had a bar or two. She's 23 now, living in Spokane with her own life, but we check in when we can. Most nights, the signal didn't hold. When it did, we kept it short and practical so the call didn't drop in the middle of anything important. Baseline is important in this work, so you notice when it's gone. Midweek, I heard Tom checking in with base about a brush pile a rancher had lit down in the valley. Someone had a permit, and it was throwing a lot of white. He and base ran through bearings and the township range numbers until they pinned it. After that, he and I compared skyline haze. "Bit of a lid today," he said. I told him I had the same, and we both marked it. Nothing exciting, just routine. You want plenty of that. Around the middle of that first week, I got my first hint that something was off, and it didn't come from the trees. The static on the service channel sat heavier than usual, and the side channel that normally carried truck chatter stayed empty. On a normal Tuesday, I'd catch the logging crews on 4 as they moved up and down the spur roads. That day, there was nothing. I put the radio on scan and let it ride while I did paperwork, and it didn't pick up a thing but the occasional weather burst. When Sarah checked in, I asked if she was hearing the same. "Static's heavy today," she said. "Haven't heard the trucks either. Tom says 4's quiet up his way." "Copy," I said. "Weird for a Tuesday." I wrote in my journal that night, nothing dramatic, just a note so I wouldn't forget the baseline. "Forest seems more settled than usual. Good sleeping weather." It read like a compliment at the time. Helena and I have a standing joke about my cooking up there. She asked in one of those short calls if I'd burned the coffee yet. I told her not since 2018, and she said she didn't believe me. That was the whole thing. No big talk, just a small thread to pull on when the line connected. If it didn't, I kept working. That's how I prefer it. On the morning of day 8, I took the 8 a.m. weather and stepped out to the catwalk to check the tree line. On the grating by the door, there was a small bird lying on its side. It looked like it had landed and stopped. When I crouched to move it, the eyes were milky, like film over glass. I've picked up enough window strikes and sick birds to know the difference. This wasn't that. I dropped it over the rail and washed up. Back at the log, I kept it clean. 8 a.m. One dead passerine on catwalk. I finished the entry and sat still for a minute. That was when something else clicked. I hadn't heard a single bird call since I got up there. Not one. No dawn calls, no chatter in the scrub, no wings pacing the edge of the clearing. Not fewer birds. No birds. Maybe it was weather, or a front I hadn't gotten an alert for, or an odd lull that would break by afternoon. But 12 seasons of experience whispered something else. The forest doesn't go quiet like this without reason. Animals go silent when a predator moves through. But what kind of predator silences everything for days? I stuck to the schedule and ran the 2 o'clock and the 6 o'clock like always. I tried Helena in the evening. The call connected once, then dropped, so we traded 2 short texts and left it there. I signed the day's log and put the pen back in the cup. If I had left at the end of that first week, I wouldn't have much to tell you. But I didn't leave, and the silence didn't break. Days 9 to 16. Day 9 started the same. Morning weather. Wind 3 to 5 out of the northeast. Visibility 10 miles. Sky clear. No smoke. I wrote it down, and then I did something I'd been putting off. I stepped out onto the catwalk, cupped my hands around my mouth, and shouted toward the tree line. My voice came out loud and carried across the clearing. It should have echoed. It should have scattered something. Instead, it just stopped. The forest took the sound and didn't give anything back. No birds lifting, no squirrels chattering back. Nothing. The silence that came after felt heavier than the silence before. I went back inside and made coffee, overthinking it. Had to be. By day 10, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The absence of sound had a shape to it. I started noticing how loud my own movements were, the scrape of my boots on the plywood, the click of the pen cap. On day 12, I sat with my hand on the radio and debated whether to call it in. Wildlife observations weren't my job. Base would tell me that. If I pushed it, they might flag me for a welfare eval and pull me off the mountain for a psych check I didn't need. But 12 seasons of experience was screaming at me that this wasn't normal, and ignoring it felt worse than breaking protocol. I waited until the afternoon check and kept my voice flat. Station, this is Whitman Ridge. Weather report follows, but I need to note something unusual. Complete absence of wildlife activity in this sector. No bird calls, no animal movement for 5 days running. Recommend sending someone to check if this is disease-related or... Base cut me off. Whitman Ridge, focus on fire weather. Wildlife observations are outside your scope. I signed off and didn't push it. You don't argue with dispatch unless something's on fire. That night, I broke the silence rule I'd been keeping and called Pine Ridge on the emergency frequency. Sarah picked up after 2 beeps. Sarah, you getting any animal sounds out there? There was a pause. Some. Couple owls last night. Why? Nothing here. Dead quiet for almost a week. Maybe they're just somewhere else, Ray. Her voice carried a question she didn't want to say out loud, and I didn't either. I thanked her and signed off. The next few days, I tried to stay normal. I ran my observations and maintained equipment and did the work the way I'd done it every other season. But the silence got into my head. I started talking to myself just to hear a human voice. Small things at first. All right, let's check fuel moisture. Winds picked up. Just enough to prove I was still there. By day 14, I caught myself saying things that didn't need saying. Coffee's done. Sun's going down. Like I was narrating for someone who wasn't there. I also started whispering without meaning to. I'd go to call out a bearing and my voice would come out under my breath like I didn't want to be heard. I'd correct it and speak up, but an hour later I'd be doing it again. I left the radio on scan more than I should have, even when I wasn't expecting traffic. Staying alert, I said. Really, I just wanted to catch any scrap of voice or static that proved the world was still turning somewhere else. Most of the time, it gave me nothing. Sleep became a problem. I'd lie on the cot and wait for some baseline hum to fall asleep to, and there wasn't one. The silence sat on my chest. I'd wake at 2 or 3 in the morning because my ears were straining so hard they invented sounds that weren't there. I tried leaving the radio on for background static, but that only made it worse. The static had texture. On day 15, I caught myself standing at the window longer than I needed to, just staring at the tree line. Not scanning for smoke, just looking, waiting for something to move. I checked the Osborne twice in an hour, even though I'd already done the sweep. I wiped down the radio cabinet that didn't need wiping. I recounted the spare fuses, small loops to keep my hands busy and my head from asking questions I didn't want answered. That night, I made myself go through my evening routine the same as always. I wrote in my journal, but all I put down was the date and still quiet. I didn't elaborate. I didn't want to see it written out. Day 16, evening. I was finishing the 6 o'clock weather log when I heard it. Footsteps. Steady, deliberate. The crunch of gravel and dead undergrowth, circling the base of the tower. Not fast, not slow, just measured like someone pacing a perimeter. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the catwalk. My breath came shallow and my hand stayed level, but my heart was hammering hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. The beam cut down through the dark and lit the ladder, the crossbeams, the ground. Nothing there. But the footsteps kept going, slow, purposeful, just outside the reach of the light. I could hear the rhythm, pause, step, like whoever it was stopping to look up. I shouted down, "Hey, who's there?" The footsteps stopped. I stood there for 10 minutes, maybe longer, with the light pointed at where the sound had been. My hand was steady on the flashlight. My breathing was steady, but my ears were ringing from how hard I was listening. I swept the beam in a full circle. Nothing. No movement. No shape breaking from the trees. No reflection of eyes. Nothing moved. No voice answered. No shape stepped into the light. After a while, I went back inside and locked the hatch. I sat on the cot with my back to the door and waited another hour. The footsteps didn't come back, but when the silence returned, it wasn't the same. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. Day 17. Dawn came in cold and I was already awake. I'd given up on full nights. I made coffee and took it out to the catwalk to watch the light come up over the ridge. The clearing below was gray and still. Then I saw it. A figure. Standing at the edge of the tree line. Upright, motionless, facing the tower. I stood there with the mug in my hand and stared. It wasn't fear I felt right away. It was something heavier. A pull. Like my eyes had locked onto it and couldn't let go. The longer I looked, the harder it was to look away. I forced myself to break the stare and grabbed the binoculars from inside. When I came back out and trained them on the spot, the figure resolved slightly. Tall, wearing dark clothing. Features stayed indistinct at that distance. I shouted down, "Hey!" No response. I lifted the binoculars again, steadied them on the rail. Out at the tree line, the figure made a small movement at the same time. An arm coming up and then dropping like a half-started gesture. I couldn't tell if it was a wave or if I was reading coincidence into distance and morning light. The figure stayed where it was. I watched for another 10 minutes. It didn't move again. When I finally turned to refill my coffee and looked back, the spot was empty. I stayed on the catwalk until the coffee went cold. Then I radioed the ranger station. "Base, I've got someone in my sector. Looks like a hiker, but they're not responding to hail." "Copy, Whitman Ridge. We'll make a note. Probably just passing through." Days 18 and 19 passed normally. Weather, scans, radio checks. I kept my eyes on the tree line more than I wanted to admit, but nothing showed itself. By day 20, I'd started thinking I'd made it up. Stress hallucination. Trick of the light at dawn. Then, late on day 20, I caught it again. Different part of the clearing, standing in thick brush where there was no path. The shoulders were too level, like someone holding a pose rather than standing naturally. I didn't turn away this time. I grabbed the binoculars without breaking my stare and brought them up slowly. The figure resolved through the glass, tall, wearing something dark. The face turned slightly toward the tower, but the distance and angle kept the face in shadow, no clear features. I lowered the binoculars to wipe the lens. When I looked again, there was nothing obvious in that spot anymore. I couldn't pick it out. I stayed at the window and scanned for another 20 minutes. My hands were steady, my breathing was steady, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been looking at something that was looking back. That night I called Sarah. "Sarah, you ever hear stories about someone living rough out here? A hermit or something?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Tom mentioned it once. Said there's an old guy who camps way back in the timber. People have been seeing him for years, just there. Anyone ever talk to him?" "Not that I heard. Why, you see him?" I thought about how to answer. Maybe. Someone's been around the tower, keeping their distance. "Probably him," she said. Weird, but harmless. I thanked her and signed off. I wanted to believe her. Hermit made sense. Hermit was grounded. Hermit was something I could explain. Days 21 through 23, I didn't see anything. I kept working, kept scanning, kept checking the same tree line even when there was nothing there. I found myself pausing mid-sweep to stare at empty spots, as if expecting it to appear. The figure didn't show itself again for days, and that made it worse. If it had been constant, I could have gotten used to it, but the randomness kept me watching. I avoid going down unless there's a reason. On day 23, there was one. A bolt on the lower catwalk brace had worked loose, and I needed to tighten it before it sheared off in the wind. I took my tools down and did the work quickly, keeping my eyes on the job and not the tree line. On the way back up, I saw something on a clean patch of moss near the base. A small object sitting there like someone had set it down carefully. I crouched and picked it up. It was a toy charm, the kind you attach to a keychain. Helena keeps one on her keys. Same make, same color. But the metal ring was missing. It was just the toy, and it was weather-worn, as if it had been sitting out here for weeks. I stood there longer than I needed to, mass-produced. Someone lost it years ago. I pocketed it anyway. I went back up and didn't mention it on the radio. On day 24, mid-afternoon, I caught a glimpse between the trees. Just a shape, just a suggestion of posture. It didn't stay long enough for me to center it. I marked the time in my journal, but didn't write what I'd seen. Day 25 was quiet. Day 26 wasn't. Night. No moon. I was on the catwalk when a darker shape moved between two trees at the edge of the clearing. For a moment, it was not a tree. It was upright and wrong. I brought the binoculars up, and the shape resolved into nothing recognizable. Just dark on dark. I stood there too long. The cold found me. I went inside without turning on the light. I slept badly. In the morning, nothing there. Had to be nothing there. I kept doing the job, morning weather, afternoon weather, evening check. I kept scanning for smoke and filling out log entries and running the routine like nothing had changed. But I couldn't stop thinking about the charm. I'd been carrying it in my pocket since I found it at the base of the tower. Helena still had hers. I'd seen it on a video call last month. I tried calling her that night. The line rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? I tried again an hour later. Same result. I sent a text. Call when you can, not urgent. She didn't respond that night, or the next morning. By afternoon, I'd convinced myself the charm was just coincidence. Mass-produced item. Someone lost one on a hike years ago. Then my phone buzzed. Helena. Sorry, been busy. You okay? I typed. When did you last see your keychain charm? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, why? I stared at the screen. The dots appeared again. Finally, Dad, what's wrong? I put the phone down and didn't answer. 60 miles from anywhere she'd ever been. I didn't call her about it. I didn't know what I would say. I found something of yours in the woods. That's not a conversation. That's a question I wasn't ready to ask. So I carried it and didn't look at it and tried not to think about what it meant. The figure didn't show itself again for days. That was good. Easier to believe the hermit had moved on, found another part of the forest to haunt. But I kept checking the tree line. I couldn't stop. Even when there was nothing there, I'd pause mid-sweep and stare at the empty spaces between trees, waiting for something to step into view. I caught myself doing it during weather observations, during radio checks, during meals. The binoculars stayed within arm's reach at all times. Day 28 was normal. Normal check-ins, normal weather. Sarah and I compared visibility readings in the afternoon. Tom reported a small lightning strike to his northwest that hadn't caught. Routine traffic, routine voices. I wrote in my journal that night but kept it short. Just the date and conditions, nothing personal. I had trouble sleeping. That wasn't new anymore. The silence had weight to it, and lying in the dark with nothing to listen to made my ears strain until they invented sounds. I'd jerk awake thinking I'd heard footsteps or a voice or the hatch opening. Each time, there was nothing. Day 29. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up and couldn't tell what had pulled me out of sleep. No sound, no dream I could remember, just awake, alert. My heart was beating harder than it should have been for someone lying still. The silence pressed against the walls of the cab like something solid. I needed air, just the stuffiness of the small space, the recycled smell of wood smoke and coffee and my own clothes. I stepped out onto the catwalk. The forest was black, darkness sitting heavy over the clearing. The cold hit my face and I stood there breathing it in, trying to slow my pulse. Then I heard it. A voice, low, quiet, coming from somewhere in the tree line. It sounded like Helena, not her adult voice, younger, the way she used to call for me when she was small and couldn't find me in the house. Daddy? Thin and far away, threading between the trees. Then something else, quieter. I can't find the way. It could have been wind through branches. It could have been my own head reaching for a pattern that wasn't there, filling in sounds with something familiar because I'd been thinking about that damn charm all week. I couldn't separate it cleanly. I couldn't be sure. I stood there and listened for it to happen again. 30 seconds, a minute. The forest gave me nothing back. Just silence, just cold, just my own breathing loud in my ears. I went back inside. I checked the hatch twice before lying down. I didn't sleep again that night. Day 30. I considered putting it in the log. I sat with the pen in my hand for a long time, trying to figure out how to write it. Possible auditory anomaly. Source unidentified. That's how you'd phrase it if you wanted to sound clinical, if you wanted to pretend you hadn't heard your daughter's voice coming out of the trees. I didn't write it. I didn't want a welfare pull-off and a mandatory eval over one bad night. They'd send someone up to talk to me, ask me how I was sleeping, whether I was eating, whether I'd had thoughts of self-harm. All the standard questions. And then they'd pull me off the mountain and send me home to wait for a clearance that might not come. I kept the schedule and kept my radio calls clean. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't tell Tom. There was nothing to tell that wouldn't make me sound like I was losing it. I'd heard something that might have been a voice, and then I hadn't heard it again. That's not a report. That's a footnote you keep to yourself and hope it stays buried. Days 31 through 33 blurred together. On day 32, I did the morning weather observation, then found myself doing it again 2 hours later. I had the psychrometer in my hand and the chart open before I realized I'd already logged the same readings. I checked the log to be sure. There they were. Dry bulb, wet bulb, humidity, all recorded at 8 a.m. It was 10:15 a.m. I'd lost track. I put the psychrometer away and made myself sit down. But an hour later, I was tightening ladder bolts I'd checked the day before. My hands needed work. My head needed quiet. The routine wasn't holding anymore. I started leaving the radio on scan even when I wasn't expecting traffic. The hiss and crackle of static was better than silence. Sometimes I'd hear fragments of distant transmissions, voices too faint to make out, and I'd turn the volume up trying to catch the words. I never could. I didn't go outside at night unless I had to. When I did, I kept it quick, weather check at 6, back inside by 6:15. I didn't linger on the catwalk or stare at the tree line after dark. The figure didn't appear. The silence held. I started to think maybe I was past the worst of it. Maybe the hermit had moved on. Maybe the voice had been nothing. Maybe I just needed more sleep. Day 34, evening radio check. I was talking to Base about the next day's forecast when I mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that I'd been seeing a possible hiker in the area. Probably nothing, I said. Guy's been camping rough for a while. Thought you should note it. Base responded, Copy, Whitman Ridge. Can you describe the individual? I started to answer, then stopped. The words caught in my throat. I realized I couldn't give details beyond what I'd already said. Upright shape, dark clothing, too far for a face. After nearly 3 weeks of watching, I knew nothing about what I'd been looking at. Never mind, Base. Too far to get details. Probably moved on by now. I signed off and looked out the window. The tree line was empty. The clearing was still. I slept badly. I dreamed, but I couldn't remember what about. Just a feeling of movement, of searching for something in the dark. When I woke up, the sun was coming through the windows, and everything looked normal. Day 35. I was brittle by then, sleeping in fragments, eating when I remembered to, running the routine because it was all I had left that made sense. I kept the schedule, ran my scans, and kept the logs clean. The figure didn't show itself. The silence continued. That night, I fell into the first real sleep I'd had in over a week. Deep, heavy, the kind where you sink and don't feel yourself go under. Helena was missing. She was out there somewhere in the dark, and I had to find her. I could hear her calling, thin and far away, threading between the trees. The same voice I'd heard from the catwalk. Daddy? And then, quieter. I can't find the way. I followed it. I pushed through underbrush and climbed over deadfall and called her name until my throat burned. I never caught up. The voice stayed ahead of me. Always ahead. I kept walking because stopping wasn't an option. Then I woke up. I was lying face down in pine needles. The smell of dirt filled my nose. My hands were pressed into cold soil. I wasn't in the tower. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, and looked around. Trees everywhere. The gray light of early morning filtering through the canopy. No clearing, no tower in sight. The forest was denser here than anything near Whitman Ridge, the canopy so thick the morning light barely reached the ground. My boots were caked with mud. My throat was raw, like I'd been shouting for hours. My palms were scraped, and one knee ached from an impact I didn't remember. There was dried mud on my ankles too, up past the boot line, like I'd been walking through wet ground for a long time. I'd walked out of the tower in my sleep, climbed down the ladder, crossed the clearing, pushed miles into the forest, all without waking up. I stood and tried to get my bearings. The slope ran downhill to my left. I didn't recognize the immediate area, but I knew general topography. 12 seasons of reading terrain. If I headed uphill and east, I should hit the ridge eventually. From there, I could spot the tower. I started walking. After 2 hours, I stopped and made myself think. I marked a tree with my knife and walked due east by the sun. After 40 minutes, I found the same marked tree. I hadn't turned, I hadn't curved, but there it was, my mark. By late afternoon, I accepted what I'd been fighting all day. I was lost, not turned around, not temporarily disoriented, lost in a way that 12 seasons of experience couldn't fix. I found a spot with decent cover and built a shelter. Basic lean-to, the kind they teach you in the first week of training. I kept it small. I gathered what I could for a fire, but kept it low. I didn't want to attract attention. Night came fast. I sat with my back against a tree and watched the darkness fill in the gaps between the trunks. The fire crackled. The silence pressed in from all sides. I slept in fits. Every time I started to drift, I'd jerk awake and check my surroundings. Still in the shelter, still by the fire. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, I woke with my hands buried in the dirt. I was on my knees at the edge of the firelight, fingers digging into the soil like I was trying to unearth something. I pulled my hands out and sat back. My fingernails were packed with dirt. My knees were wet from the ground. I moved back to the shelter and didn't sleep again. The hours crawled. I watched the fire burn down and didn't add more wood. I watched the darkness and tried not to see shapes in it. Sometimes I caught movement at the edge of my vision. A shift between trees, a shadow that didn't match the others. I'd turn and there'd be nothing. Always peripheral, never direct. Dawn came slow and gray. I stood and stretched the stiffness out of my legs. The fire was ash. The shelter looked smaller in the daylight. I turned to check my bearings. The figure was there, standing between 2 trees at the edge of the clearing I'd made. Same posture, same stillness. Close enough now that I could see the shape of shoulders, the angle of the head. I couldn't make out features. We stayed like that for what felt like minutes. Then I blinked, or looked away for half a second, and when I looked back, the space between the trees was empty. Just forest. Just silence. I grabbed my things and started walking again. I walked until my legs burned and my vision blurred, and I couldn't tell anymore which direction I was heading. The terrain kept folding. Every ridge led to more trees. Every valley curved back on itself. By the second night, I stopped trying to navigate and just focused on survival. Water from streams, shelter where I could find it, fire when I could risk it. I talked to myself to fill the silence. Helena's name, my own, words I didn't plan to say, coming out of my mouth like someone else was speaking them. The figure didn't appear again, but I felt it, the way you feel someone watching you from across a room. The light came and went. I walked and rested and walked again. I stood up near the creek and tried to remember how many nights I'd been out here. 3, maybe 4. The days had started bleeding into each other. The forest held its breath. I crouched at the creek and drank without boiling. I'd stopped caring about that. The water was cold and tasted like minerals, and I swallowed until my stomach ached. Then I stood and walked downhill because downhill was the only direction that made sense anymore. Ridges appeared where valleys should have been. Clearings looped back on themselves. I found my own boot prints twice more, spaced in ways I didn't remember walking. I stopped trying to navigate and just kept moving. Sometime that day, I saw a porch light. It was drifting between the trees about 50 yards ahead. I stopped and stared at it. It bobbed slightly, like it was attached to something moving. Then it flickered and went out, and there was nothing but forest. I kept walking. Later, I caught the flash of a ranger's jacket turning away behind a stand of cedars, green and khaki. I called out and pushed through the brush, but when I got there, the clearing was empty. No jacket, no person, just pine needles and silence. The hallucinations came more often after that. Shapes at the edge of vision. Sounds that might have been voices. I learned to ignore them. I learned to keep my eyes forward and my feet moving and not trust anything I saw. That night, I built a small fire and sat with my back against a rock. I was afraid of the sleepwalking, afraid of waking up somewhere else, afraid of what my body did when I wasn't in control of it. I slept in fragments. Every noise woke me, every shift in the shadows. When I finally let myself drift, the dreams came back. Helena's voice, the forest, the endless searching. I woke up at dawn. I sat there for a long time. My hands were shaking. I couldn't make them stop. I got up and walked. I found a scrap of paper in my jacket, the corner of something I'd torn earlier, and I wrote on it without looking at the page. I don't know what I put down. It didn't matter. It was just proof that I'd been here, that someone had been here. I let the paper fall and closed my eyes. The silence was complete. No wind, no water, no birds, just the cold and the blue light and the weight of the forest pressing in. Then I felt it, a shadow falling across my face. The sun blocked by something close, something standing over me. The air changed, just different. Like the space above me had been replaced with something that wasn't quite air. I could feel it on my skin, not pressure, not movement, just wrongness. The way you'd feel a held breath, if breath had weight. And underneath that, a smell. Faint, not rot, not earth. Something older, mineral and distant, like the smell of stones pulled from deep water. A smell that shouldn't exist in a forest. I kept my eyes closed. I could feel it there. The presence I'd been carrying since the first week. The figure from the tree line. The standing man. Close enough now that I could have reached out and touched it. Close enough that I could feel it breathing. The rhythm was wrong. Too long between breaths, like something that didn't need air but was mimicking the act anyway. I sat there and listened to my own breathing slow, and I waited for whatever came next. The last thing I remember is the cold. KCN Channel 4, Evening News. Authorities in Lewis County have concluded their search for a veteran fire lookout who disappeared from his post in Cascade National Forest last week. The body of 42-year-old Raymond Kellner was discovered Thursday morning by a rancher near Packwood, approximately 60 miles from the Whitman Ridge Lookout Tower where he was last stationed. According to the Sheriff's Department, Kellner made his final radio check-in Tuesday evening at approximately 6:15 p.m. His body was found less than 40 hours later in a remote drainage basin accessible only by foot. Officials say the terrain between the tower and the recovery site includes dense old-growth forest, several river crossings, and significant elevation changes. Search and rescue coordinators described the route as essentially impassable without specialized equipment. Perhaps most puzzling to investigators is that Kellner was found barefoot. Despite the rugged conditions, granite scree, thorned undergrowth, and at least 2 creek beds along any plausible route, the Lewis County Medical Examiner reported that Kellner's feet showed no signs of trauma. No cuts, no abrasions, no bruising, no dirt embedded in the skin. His boots were not recovered at the scene. Sheriff's Deputy Mark Hendricks, who assisted in the recovery, told reporters, "In 30 years, I've never seen anything like it. The terrain out there would tear up a man's feet in a quarter mile. His looked like he'd just stepped out of the shower. It's as if he was placed there. The medical examiner has not yet released an official cause of death." The sheriff's office confirmed there were no signs of foul play and no evidence of animal predation. At the Whitman Ridge Tower, investigators found the hatch open and weather logs current through the week of Kellner's disappearance. His personal effects, including a journal, remain in evidence. The radio was found powered on, batteries removed. This incident has drawn comparisons to other unresolved disappearances in the region involving experienced outdoorsmen and search areas that yield little physical evidence. Forestry officials declined to comment. Coming up after the break, the Lewis County Fair opens this weekend with a record number of livestock entries. We'll have a preview of what to expect. Stay with us. The story ends here, but the night is just getting started. If this helped you unwind, let me know and make sure to check out some of my other videos. Don't forget to subscribe and join the Nocturnal crew so you don't miss what's coming next. Hopefully, I'll see you on the next one.